We will let you know if we hear anything more from the sheriff or if a press conference is called at any point. We'll let you know as soon as we know the timing of that. Also, if you have any questions about the Guthrie investigation, feel free to scan that QR code on your screen. It's going to take you to a landing page where you can click on the Ask Now tab. There you can submit a question. You very well may see it on our air this weekend. All right, I'm going to leave that up while we bring in former sheriff's detective and investigator, Jamie Copenhaver. Jamie was up with me late last night, and it was a long night, Jamie. Basically, I just went over all the details of what we know so far about what happened last night. Basically, here's how things stand now. No arrests, and really still no full interview with authorities about what happened last night. So, initially, your reaction to four people total being taken into custody, but really no arrests, and the investigation continues into its second week. Your thoughts on this Saturday, Jamie?
I mean, you and I sit there and watched it play out in the wee hours of the morning, Austin. So, Fox Network and Fox Digital reported continuously that they had individuals detained. We just didn't know the number until today. So, we spoke about that. You've had some experts on the show today that spoke about it. All that telegraphs to me is that search warrant was validated by a judge. They went in and conducted that search of that residence. It's not uncommon to go and execute a search warrant and detain the people inside of whatever building you're going to search for officer safety reasons. So not a great surprise. I mean, I certainly would have liked to heard an arrest in the Nancy Guthrie case, but, Austin, I think it shows me and it telegraphs they're moving this case forward. We just listened to the sheriff. He had some very valid points. And ironically, the sheriff thinks Nancy Guthrie possibly could still be alive. So I think that's huge, given what the sheriff knows on the inside.
It's impossible for us to answer the question I'm about to ask you in totality. But in general, when you got a case like this and you're keeping a lot of information close to your chest, how much is being shared with the media and how much isn't being shared with the media? And by the way, most of the information that we're getting is coming through unofficial channels, coming from unnamed law enforcement sources that are speaking to the media. It's not really coming through official channels from a public information office or something like that. How much a piece of the pie, investigation-wise, are we actually hearing?
I think we're hearing exactly what us to hear. And, the sheriff is being very measured. Go back and look at the cases that the FBI has been involved in the past. The FBI doesn't make statements. They go out and investigate the crime. Once that crime is brought to justice and prosecution, they may give a statement through the U.S. Attorney's Office. So I think the sheriff is measured. I think it's a strategy. I think it's a good strategy. Here's why. Millions of people are sitting on the edge of their seat watching this case unfold, right? So what that creates is chatter. We just saw the reward monies up to $100,000 in this case, Austin. So that's huge. But, they're doing this as a tactic. And certainly whatever occurred last night at that house, that's huge in my opinion, because we haven't heard the exact reason, but it certainly telegraphs they are moving the ball forward and getting closer to perhaps who's behind this.
So we have been pretty much looking for images like this, and it was right after you got off the air with us last night that we saw the sheriff take out this tarp. And what could be the rationale behind them wanting to shield the media from whatever they are doing in the back of this Range Rover here?
Quite candidly, media. And, not media in particular, but media is very vested in this case. They're the eyes of the people, right? So what you don't want is to reveal what may or may not be in the back of that Range Rover. Certainly, if it's some type of evidentiary items, they could be something in there that would be, they want to protect the owner's identity, right? We spoke about it last night in the early hours. They obscured the tag with a piece of paper, so that wasn't recorded and identified as to who may own the Range Rover. So, we saw the white tent at Nancy Guthrie's house a few days ago, and this is just common practice. They don't want to give things up. And I will point out, Austin, I'm so grateful and so happy to see and learn they actually towed this Range Rover and pounded it so they can thoroughly go through it in a controlled environment.
There was a warrant involved with everything that we saw last night. multiple sources saying that the Range Rover was pulled over in connection with that search warrant. Also, the operation that happened at that home had to do with the warrant as well. You've been following cases like this throughout the course of your career, Jamie. Is it fairly normal for a warrant to be executed and not end up in any arrests?
Absolutely. Going back to my undercover days, I, I have literally authored and executed thousands of search warrants in my career. And all of those cases are different. And I've certainly been in locations to search for whatever the items we're searching for. You will find a room for or a house full of people. Not all those people are involved in my case. So you're going to certainly detain those people upon executing that warrant for officer safety. But that certainly doesn't mean they're suspects or persons of interest in this case. They merely were inside the residence at the time the warrant was executed. That's played out. I mean, we've seen them all released. Oddly enough, the sheriff came out and the sheriff seemed very positive in respect to how far they've moved the case forward. Certainly sounded like he has a lot to go on, given the fact they've executed now 2 search warrants at 2 different locations. So I think the evidence is there. They certainly have some probable cause, and they're literally putting the case together, I think, behind the scenes privately, which they should.
Matt Finn with this earlier today. We are hearing, and by the way, it says this is from Fox News, but Matt Finn is on the ground, and he's been getting a lot of correspondence from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Nanos speaking with Finn, saying no one was arrested, no one remains in custody following an operation in Tucson conducted Friday in connection to the Nancy Guthrie case. Sources told Fox News Digital that at least 3 people had been detained in connection to a search warrant conducted at a residence in Tucson late Friday, about 2 miles from Guthrie's home. Photos gave a partial view of one man handcuffed and detained in the parking lot of a Culver's restaurant nearby in connection to the search warrant, but no charges were confirmed. Authorities have not named any suspects or persons of interest 2 weeks since 84-year-old Guthrie vanished from her Tucson home on February 1st. What does the 2-week mark say about an investigation like this?
The sheriff came out and said he has over 400 investigators working on this. So 2 weeks is a long span of time for Nancy Guthrie. Her health is at risk. So it looks grim for Nancy. But the sheriff seemed to think he had hope. Also, if we can go back to that Range Rover for a moment, how these search warrants work is if you're going to go to 123 Elm Street and execute a warrant, and you have that warrant signed by a judge, you can search that residence and anything in the curtilage, meaning the driveway. You can search other vehicles. I'm wanting to find out how they ended up getting to the Range Rover. That certainly wouldn't be the scope of their search warrant at that address, right? So, my question is, do they have an independent warrant for that Range Rover specifically separate of the residence? Because, you just can't do that unless you have probable cause. So I have a question. How did they get to the Range Rover? Did they have a warrant or a secondary warrant for that Range Rover to be announced? We just don't know.
Amy just sent a question in. And by the way, anybody who does want to send a question in, they can scan the QR code on your screen. It'll take you to a landing page where you can click on the Ask Now tab. That's how you can submit a question, just like Amy did a few moments ago. So the question here, how can there be new DNA evidence almost 14 days into this case? Why? How was this not discovered earlier? And how is this new evidence relevant? So Jamie, one thing that I would like to clarify here, just because we just found out about the evidence, which, just to clarify for everybody, we did learn within the past day or so that there was, in fact, unidentified DNA that was found within the home. Just because we're learning about that within the past 24 hours doesn't necessarily mean that that's when the police found it, correct?
Absolutely not. I mean, I can assure you, based on what the sheriff and FBI has done thus far, they've made a couple of visits to a couple of the homes, Nancy Guthrie's and Annie Guthrie's home. So they're collecting that evidence as they go. But I can assure you, anything bodily fluids, any DNA evidence, hairs, fibers, or any tools or objects used in this case were absolutely collected right off the bat. What you do is you go out and you start building cases. Speculative here, they may have been looking for DNA samples or swabs from the individuals involved last night. We don't know that. Speculation based on experience. So in terms of missing DNA or evidence, I don't think they have in this case. But what I think they are doing is building their case as they go. And quite candidly, these cases could, they could go straight down the path, and then you do a 90-degree turn on another lead or a piece of evidence that you find during the search and lab work.
So we basically are hearing from the Pima County Sheriff's Department that no arrests were made after last night's activity. They said it stemmed from a lead received by investigators. Everything they did last night stemmed from a lead. That really does speak to the importance of any lead that anybody might have, any piece of information anybody could have, really could lead them to something. It didn't turn out to lead to any arrests last night, Jamie, but really any small piece of evidence can lead to a big crack in the case, correct?
Yeah, we've all, and you guys in the media, we've said it for years. If you see something, say something. And, that was backed up by raising the award from 50,000 to 100K. We saw that in the last 48 hours. So let's not forget about the latest letter that came out wanting that one Bitcoin for information on Nancy Guthrie herself. So, we don't know how that pit played out. We don't know where it originated from. But I, just assure the viewers, they had probable cause signed off by a judge. So it must have been something strong enough to convince a judge to sign that warrant for the search warrant. And everybody has to have a little bit of relief in terms of, they're moving this case forward. Going back to the glove, what lab should it have been sent to? I really truly don't think it really matters at this point. They've sent all the evidence. The sheriff has a contract with that lab in Florida. And I really don't see that compromising anything moving forward as to which lab may or may not be testing that glove. So a lot of speculation, but it sounds like they're confident in the direction they're heading.
We're going to wrap up here in a moment, Jamie. I just want to get your take. What are your big questions leading into the rest of this weekend? And what are your major questions leading into the beginning of next week? What are your major questions? And really, what are the biggest, most glaring things that we still don't know about the investigation?
They're never going to tell us all behind the scenes. So, but, they're telegraphing. They've executed 2 search warrants. They've detained one person and then 4 other persons in another home. So they're definitely on the hunt for something. We don't know what that is, right? But let's not lose sight that Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Her health is at risk. And these 400 agents and deputy sheriffs that are working on this know this, Austin. So it's not like they're sitting around and fumbling. I think they're well organized. I think the sheriff and his team are on the right path. What I hope to see is some type of press conference coming up early this week announcing maybe a potential lead or a break in the case. We know that they seem to be honing in on someone or somebody. We just don't know when that arrest may occur. And I'm going to suggest it right here. I think we will see an arrest in this case, but it's going to be on their time when they have all their ducks in the row to effect that arrest.
All right. Jamie Copenhaver is a former sheriff, investigator, and detective. Thank you for the time. I'm sure we'll be checking in soon.
Thank you, Austin.